Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. I never thought much of my job as a night security guard. Honestly, it was the kind of work most people would find boring, monotonous even. But for me, that was the appeal. I didn't need anything exciting, nothing that would keep me on edge. I had no desire for danger or drama. I just wanted peace and quiet, and that's exactly what the job gave me. I worked in a mid-sized office building tucked away in downtown Los Angeles, a rather unremarkable structure that housed a range of small businesses, most of which were startups. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention or anything unusual. The building itself was nothing special, just a 10-story office block with narrow hallways and low ceilings. The elevators creaked and groaned when they moved, and the fluorescent lights above were constantly flickering, buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. The air always smelled faintly of stale coffee, no matter what time of day it was. And even though there were a few janitors who cleaned after hours, the lingering scent of something old and forgotten never really went away. I had been working the graveyard shift for 6 months now, and I had settled into a routine. My shift started at 10 p.m., and for the most part, it was pretty standard. I'd punch in, grab a cup of coffee, lukewarm like, of course, and sit behind the security desk, keeping an eye on the monitors. I'd check the alarms every hour, make my rounds through the building, and keep everything locked up tight. Nothing exciting ever happened. No break-ins, no fires, no intruders, just the soft hum of the security system and the occasional muffled sound of my boots echoing through the empty hallways. I enjoyed the silence, really. It gave me time to think, time to unwind. It was one of those jobs where you just go through the motions, not really expecting anything out of the ordinary. But, of course, that night was the exception. It started like any other, but it would quickly spiral into something I'd never forget. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I first noticed something unusual. I was sitting at the security desk, sipping my coffee while staring at the monitors. Darren, my partner, hadn't said much all night, which wasn't all that odd. Darren was one of those people who could stay quiet for hours, immersed in whatever games or TV shows he was into at the time. He would disappear into the control room, his face lit up by the glow of his computer screen, and I would carry on with my rounds, doing my thing. But tonight, I hadn't heard a word from him for a while, and that in itself wasn't too alarming, except for the fact that I had been hearing strange noises from the hallway. I glanced up at the monitor, adjusting my position in the chair, trying to focus. The cameras showed empty hallways, the dull fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows along the walls. That's when I saw it, a figure moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe some shadow dancing along the wall, but as I zoomed in, I realized it was a man. He was dressed in what looked like a maintenance uniform, dark green with a faded company logo on the chest. He was walking slowly, methodically down the hallway toward the far end of the building. But there was something about his movement that immediately struck me as off. It wasn't the way a maintenance worker would walk. He wasn't carrying any tools or pushing a cart. He wasn't even moving with purpose, like he was fixing something. No, it felt like he was just walking aimlessly, like he was looking for something, or maybe someone. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. No one was scheduled for maintenance that night. We didn't have any contractors or repair crews planned to come in. So who was this guy? Why was he here? I tried calling Darren over the radio, but there was nothing but static. I pushed the button again, this time a little more forcefully, but the same silence met me. That was strange. Darren was usually glued to his computer screen, but he always responded when I called. I tried a third time, but still nothing. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I zoomed in on the camera feed, my finger trembling slightly as I watched the man enter one of the executive offices. He didn't knock, didn't even try the door handle cautiously. He just stepped right in, his figure vanishing from view. That didn't sit right with me. Executive offices were supposed to be off limits after hours. Only a few select people had access to those areas, and I knew for a fact that none of them had been scheduled to work late. My mind was racing. Something wasn't adding up. I needed to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands suddenly feeling clammy. I didn't know why, but my instincts were telling me to be careful. I tried calling Darren one last time, but still, no response. My unease grew. There was no way I was going to leave things unchecked, especially now that I was alone. If Darren had somehow fallen asleep, or worse, if something had happened to him, I had to make sure the building was secure. I stood up from behind the desk, the weight of my flashlight heavy in my hand. The floor was cold beneath my boots as I made my way toward the hallway. The air felt thicker here, almost suffocating, and the silence was oppressive. I couldn't even hear the usual hum of the air conditioning anymore. The building was like a tomb, abandoned and lifeless. I moved quickly, trying to stay quiet, but each step felt louder than the last. The building felt more like a labyrinth now, like the walls were closing in. I rounded the corner where I'd last seen the man on the camera feed, the light flickering ominously above me. It was one of the darker parts of the building, the kind of section that made you feel like you were being watched, even when you were alone. My heart was thudding in my chest, but I pushed the fear aside. I had to stay calm. I reached the executive office door, the one the man had been fiddling with on the screen. It was cracked slightly, the door handle still turning in his hand. I could see his figure through the small gap, his back turned to me. There was something unnerving about the way he moved. It wasn't natural. He wasn't acting like someone doing their job. He was searching, and that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I called out to him, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Hey, what are you doing? This area is off limits." There was no immediate reaction. He didn't flinch, didn't seem startled. He just slowly turned around and looked at me, his face unreadable. And then he smiled. It was a slow, unnerving smile, the kind that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a smile of someone who was simply caught off guard. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill down your spine, like he knew something I didn't. "I'm just doing my job," he said calmly, his voice soft and almost too even, as though he'd rehearsed the words 1,000 times. I froze, unsure of what to say next. Something about him felt wrong, like this wasn't just some random maintenance guy who'd gotten lost in the building. I should have demanded to see some ID right there and then, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, or the smile that never quite reached his eyes. I finally managed to speak again, trying to maintain my authority. "Show me your ID," I said, taking a small step forward. But instead of complying, the man stepped closer to me, his eyes locking onto mine. Before I could react, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with a force that felt unnatural. I gasped in pain, trying to pull away, but his grip was unyielding, cold, like iron. My body slammed against a nearby desk, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I staggered to my feet, trying to regain my balance, but the man was already moving toward me again. I barely had time to react before he lunged. His hand gripped my collar, and panic exploded in my chest. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was an attack. I fought back with everything I had, my fingers scrambling for anything I could use. My flashlight. I swung it with all my strength, smashing it into his face. The man staggered back, blood dripping from his forehead, but the smile never left his lips. It was as if the blow hadn't even fazed him. My breath was ragged as I pushed myself away from the desk, my legs trembling beneath me. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get somewhere safe. The security room. That's where I would be safe. I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the hard floor. I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing louder, closer. Fear spiked in my chest, but I pushed myself harder, willing my legs to move faster. I was almost to the security room when I reached for the door handle. My heart pounded in my ears, but I barely made it inside before slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, breathing heavily, and collapsed against it, my whole body shaking. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The minutes dragged on endlessly as I sat there, pressed against the door, my heart still racing. I could hear my breath echoing in my ears, my body trembling from the sheer shock of what had just happened. My mind couldn't catch up with my body, struggling to process the events that had unfolded in such a short amount of time. That man, the way he attacked me, how unbothered he was by my attempts to defend myself, it was all so surreal. I kept staring at the security monitors, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Darren would appear on one of the screens. Maybe he'd be walking toward the control room, rubbing his eyes and asking what the hell was going on. But as the minutes ticked by, nothing changed. The hallways remained empty. The cameras showed nothing but an eerie silence, like the building itself was holding its breath. I tried calling Darren again on the radio, but still no response. Panic began to settle in like a cold weight on my chest. What if something had happened to him? What if he had been attacked first? The thought made my stomach churn. I pulled my legs up to my chest, hugging my knees as I sat on the floor of the security room, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering above me. I felt so alone. It was the strangest feeling, being in a building full of rooms and hallways, yet I felt like I was the only one there. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I waited for the police to arrive. Time stretched out in an agonizing crawl, each passing second another reminder of how vulnerable I was. I had no way of knowing where the intruder was or if he was still nearby. What if he was lurking just outside the door, waiting for me to let my guard down? When the police finally arrived, I heard the sound of their boots echoing down the hallway, their voices sharp and authoritative. Relief flooded through me in a wave, though it was quickly tempered by the dread that still lingered in my gut. I wasn't safe yet. The officers cleared the building swiftly, their flashlights sweeping every corner of the darkened hallways. I stayed in the security room, glued to the monitors, watching as they moved through the building with precision. They shouted commands, their voices bouncing off the walls. Their presence was reassuring, but at the same time, it made the whole situation feel even more real. This wasn't just some random scare anymore. Someone had been in the building, someone dangerous. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came back to the security room. He looked at me with a stern expression, his eyes scanning the room. "You're sure you didn't see anyone else? No sign of anyone else in the building?" he asked. I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "No, just him. The guy in the maintenance uniform. I didn't see anyone else." The officer nodded, but there was an edge to his voice. "We've been through every floor. There's no sign of him anywhere. No forced entry, no sign of a break-in. It's like he vanished. That didn't make any sense. There was no way someone could just vanish like that." The building had security cameras, alarms, and locked doors. How had this man gotten in? How had he disappeared without a trace? The officer continued, "We found your partner, Darren. He's in the break room, tied up, unconscious. We're going to get him checked out, but he's okay for now." I felt a weight lift off my chest when I heard Darren was alive, but the relief was short-lived. How had Darren gotten into that situation? If the man had ambushed him first, that meant he knew what he was doing. He had planned this. But how? How had he gotten past all the security? The officer paused for a moment, studying me carefully. "Did you notice anything unusual before this happened? Anything strange?" I thought back, trying to retrace my steps, trying to find some clue that would explain everything. But everything had felt normal. Darren had been his usual quiet self. The building had been its usual quiet self. And then, out of nowhere, this man had appeared. The maintenance uniform. That's what stood out to me, I said, my voice shaky. I saw him walking down the hall. No tools, no cart. It didn't look like he was actually working. The officer frowned. That's strange. We'll need to look into it. Maybe someone was pretending to be a maintenance worker, or maybe they had access somehow. Either way, we'll figure it out. They moved Darren to the ambulance, and I watched as they worked quickly, the paramedics checking his vitals and loading him into the vehicle. The officer remained in the building, continuing his investigation. I was left alone, standing in the middle of the security room, trying to make sense of everything. But as the hours passed, it became clear that we weren't going to find any answers that night. The police combed the entire building, going over every inch with a fine-tooth comb. But it was like the man had never been there. No fingerprints, no DNA, no sign of forced entry. The security footage showed nothing unusual except for the brief appearance of the man in the maintenance uniform. But there were no records of anyone entering the building, and the security system hadn't been tampered with. And then, even more unsettling, the items that were missing. Laptops, office safe, security badges, all gone, just like that. It was as if he had taken everything with him, yet there was no trace of him. The building was locked down tight, the alarms were on, there was no way he could have gotten out without triggering something. Days turned into weeks after that night. The police kept in contact, but every lead they chased led to a dead end. No one had seen anything suspicious. No one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. There were no records of the maintenance worker's uniform being issued. No one could explain how the intruder had gotten in or where he had gone. I couldn't stop thinking about that smile, the way it had spread across his face, slow and unsettling. The way he had looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. Like he had been waiting for me. I spent the following weeks looking over the security footage, hoping to find something I missed. But there was nothing. It's been months now, and I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there. The feeling that he's watching me. Waiting. My name's Alex. I'm a college student, just like a lot of other people trying to make ends meet. I work the night shift at Mel's 24-hour diner, a small, outdated diner sitting just off the highway on the outskirts of town. It's not a glamorous job by any means, but it pays the bills and helps with some of my college expenses. The pay isn't great, but it's enough to keep me afloat. The night shift at a place like this has a rhythm of its own. You get used to the quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the constant scent of greasy diner food and stale coffee filling the air. The customers are a mix of different types. Truckers stopping for a quick coffee or meal before they hit the road again. Insomniacs who don't know what else to do with their time. And sometimes even nurses or shift workers who stop by for a late night bite after a long day. Most of the time, I don't mind it. It's not glamorous work, but it's straightforward routine. You quickly adapt to the calm pace of the night, a kind of peaceful solitude, interrupted only by the occasional customer coming in. You get used to the almost eerie silence in the diner, punctuated by the soft clink of dishes and the occasional squeak of the old booths. There's a strange charm in the way time seems to slow down inside Mel's. The place hasn't changed much in years. Old-fashioned booths, checkered floors that have seen better days, and menus so worn they look like they've been through decades of spills and smudges. But I kind of like it that way. It's not trying to be something it's not, which, in a weird way, makes it feel like home. Mel's has a certain timelessness to it. much like the town itself. The town is quiet, rural, with just a few scattered farms or ranches around. The houses on the outskirts are tucked away far from the highway, so the only noise comes from passing cars and the occasional owl. It's peaceful, still, too still. But on this particular night, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but I'd been feeling a little more on edge lately. Finals were coming up, and the stress of balancing work and school was starting to catch up with me. It was just a usual shift, or so I thought. The night seemed normal at first, quiet as usual, with the diner almost empty when I clocked in around 10 p.m. But something about that night, this particular night, felt different. The diner was dead quiet, with a few regulars sitting at the counter sipping on coffee and lost in their own thoughts. A trucker in the corner booth was halfway through his meal, hunched over his plate, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. The nurse in her late 20s sat by the window, scrolling through her phone, her scrubs rumpled from a long shift at the hospital. I didn't pay much attention to them. I'd seen all types come through Mel's in the late hours before. I fell into the usual rhythm, wiping down counters, filling the coffee pots, and prepping the grill in case anyone wanted a late-night snack. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Maybe it was just the stress catching up with me, or maybe it was something else. I couldn't tell, but it wasn't the usual peace of a quiet night at Mel's. There was an underlying tension in the air that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't until a little after midnight that I noticed something odd. A van, parked across the lot in the farthest corner, nearly hidden by the shadows. It wasn't like the usual cars that came through the lot. It was an old, worn-out white van, dusty and beat up like it had been on the road for ages. The headlights were off, and there was no one inside when I first glanced at it, or at least I didn't think there was. It stood out because it was just there. The lot at Mel's is huge, the only business for miles around. The few cars parked there at that time were mostly the regulars or the employees' cars, so it struck me as strange to see a van parked so far out of view, tucked away in the corner of the lot. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sometimes park there to take a break or to meet someone. I assumed it was just another passerby, but something about it started to bug me. I could barely make out the van's shape in the dim glow of the streetlights. There was something unsettling about it. The way it was parked so far from the others, hidden in the shadows as though it didn't quite belong. I didn't recognize it. There was a figure sitting in the driver's seat, though I couldn't make out any details. The stillness of the van, the fact that the person never moved, it made my skin crawl. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. It was probably just some guy killing time. But as the hours ticked on, I couldn't stop glancing at the van. The figure inside didn't move. They didn't check their phone or look away from the diner entrance. They just sat there like they were waiting for something, or maybe someone. The diner was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only one in the world. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning, prepping, making sure everything was in order. But every time I passed the window, my eyes were drawn to the van. There was no movement, no change, just the figure sitting perfectly still. The longer I watched, the more unnerving it became. The van was like a silent presence, lurking in the shadows, its occupants' eyes, though I couldn't see them, seeming to pierce through the darkness and right into me. It wasn't much, just a fleeting glance every time I walked by, but with each passing hour, the unease inside me grew. The van, unmoving, had become a fixture of the night, something constant and eerie in a place that was meant to feel safe and routine. Around 2 a.m., when the diner had emptied out and the stillness felt suffocating, I found myself alone. The trucker had finished his meal and left. The nurse had long since gone. I was the only person left in the diner. I was in the back, mindlessly wiping down tables, when the sense of unease hit me again. The van was still there, parked in the same spot, the figure inside as motionless as ever. It was like time had frozen for that van, and it was a feeling I couldn't shake. The diner felt like a ghost town now. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound, broken only by the occasional sound of my own breath. That was when I noticed something change. I can't explain it, but I felt it. Something in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. I tried to push the thought aside, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The van, the figure, everything was starting to feel off. It wasn't long after 2:30 a.m. when the unease in the diner became almost unbearable. The quiet had deepened, filling every corner of the space. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was steady, like a constant pulse, but even that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I kept telling myself that I was just tired, that I had been working too many hours and my mind was playing tricks on me. But the truth was, I couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up my spine, telling me something wasn't right. The van was still parked in the far corner of the lot, just as it had been for hours. The figure inside hadn't moved, not once. I couldn't see their face clearly, but the way they sat, perfectly still, eyes seemingly fixed on the diner, made my stomach tighten. It was like they were waiting for something, or someone. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on my work, but every time I glanced out the window, there it was. The van, parked in the same spot, the same figure inside. It was almost like I couldn't escape it. The longer I stared at it, the more my unease grew, until it felt like the figure in the van was staring back at me too. The parking lot outside felt darker, colder, and I started to wonder if the shadows had gotten deeper or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The diner was empty now. The trucker was gone, his booth abandoned, the nurse had left hours ago. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder now, its rhythmic ticking only adding to the silence. The night had stretched on, but the end of my shift wasn't quite near enough to offer any relief. I was alone, and the stillness around me felt like it was closing in. It wasn't until I started to head to the back to take out the trash that I heard it. The low rumble of the van's engine started up, cutting through the silence like a sudden jolt of electricity. At first it was faint, like the hum of a faraway growl, but then it grew louder, more distinct, until the faint rumble turned into a full roar. My heart skipped a beat, I froze, my body instinctively tense as the headlights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the lot. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The van, which had been sitting idle for so long, was now moving, slowly, deliberately, like the wheels were grinding to life after hours of inaction. It wasn't the kind of departure you'd expect from someone leaving a diner parking lot. This was different. It was methodical, almost as if it was taking its time, waiting for the right moment. And I knew, deep down, that something was very wrong. The van started creeping toward the side of the building, the employee entrance, the door I was just about to step out of. My pulse began to race, the knot in my stomach tightening. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts screamed at me to get inside, to lock the door, to hide from whatever was happening. But I didn't act fast enough. I had just stepped outside when the van's engine revved again, this time louder, more forceful, like it was in a hurry. My feet froze to the ground, and for a moment I couldn't move. The van was now just a few feet away from me, its headlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The figure inside didn't move, but I felt their presence in a way that made my blood run cold. I could see the silhouette of the driver, sitting perfectly still, his hands gripping the wheel tight, but I couldn't make out his face. His shadow was cast across the dashboard, giving him an almost menacing, ominous aura. My heart hammered in my chest, the weight of the situation sinking in. I was standing outside, alone, with a van blocking the only path back inside the diner. The parking lot felt vast, empty, like an ocean of asphalt with no one around to help. I could feel the cold night air against my skin, but it didn't comfort me. It made the situation feel more raw, more exposed. I was completely vulnerable. I glanced around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but there was nothing. No other cars, no other people, just the van and me. I could feel my breath catching in my throat. The silence was suffocating. For a moment, I considered turning back, running inside the diner, locking the door, and pretending nothing was wrong. But the closer the van got, the less I felt like I had any control over the situation. I was powerless. The van's engine revved again. This time, the sound was unmistakably louder, and I could feel the ground beneath me tremble slightly as the vehicle rolled forward. My eyes darted to the back door of the diner, but I was too far to reach it in time. I could almost hear the pounding of my heart in my ears as the van slowly rolled to a stop right beside the employee entrance, its headlights blinding for a moment before they flickered out. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. The van's side door swung open with a suddenness that made my stomach drop. I could hear the shuffle of footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, coming toward me. It was too quick, too purposeful. My body stiffened. My legs, frozen with fear, could barely move. I didn't have time to react. Before I could even take a step back, the figure from the van shot out, moving faster than I could process. In an instant, he was on me, grabbing my wrist with a grip so tight it felt like my bones might snap. I tried to pull away, to break free, but his hand was unyielding, a vice around my arm. My breath caught in my throat, and panic surged through my veins like ice water. I kicked out wildly, desperate to break free. My foot landed against his shin with a sharp thud, and for a split second I felt his grip loosen. That moment of hesitation was enough. I shoved myself backward, stumbling on the gravel, my heart racing as I struggled to find my footing. I had to get inside. I had to get away. I turned and ran, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. I could hear his footsteps behind me, pounding against the ground. I made it to the door, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal handle. My breath came in shallow gasps as I finally yanked it open, slamming it behind me with all my strength. I locked the door quickly, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the bolt in place. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving as I tried to calm my racing heart. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then, just as I began to believe I might be safe, I heard it. The van's engine roared to life again, louder than before, the tires screeching on the asphalt as the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving the parking lot in a cloud of dust. I stood there, frozen against the door, my body trembling from the adrenaline. My mind was spinning. What had just happened? Why had he attacked me? What did he want? I didn't have any answers. I just knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. I had narrowly escaped, but for how long? The moments after the van sped off felt like they stretched into eternity. I stood by the door, heart racing, trying to catch my breath, my hands still shaking uncontrollably. The quiet of the diner, once familiar, now felt alien, oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in around me. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, trying to piece together what had just happened. Why had the man attacked me? Was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or was this something more calculated? I didn't know. I couldn't make sense of it. I stayed pressed against the door for what felt like an eternity, my back rigid and my eyes darting between the parking lot and the phone on the counter. I knew I needed to call the police, but for a moment I couldn't bring myself to move. The fear was paralyzing, like my body was still trying to process what had happened. Finally, I forced myself to move. My legs felt unsteady, as though they might give way at any second, but I managed to stumble over to the counter and grab the phone. My fingers were so numb I had trouble dialing 911, but I eventually managed it. The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely safe, not yet. My words came out in a frantic rush as I tried to explain everything that had happened. The van, the figure, the attack. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it wasn't even mine. The police assured me they would be on their way immediately, and within minutes the sirens could be heard in the distance, their wail cutting through the still night air. I watched the flashing lights reflect off the windows of the diner, casting an eerie glow across the room. Part of me felt relief, knowing that help was on the way, but another part of me was still stuck in the memory of the man's face, the shadowed outline of him, his grip on my wrist, and the sickening feeling that I had narrowly escaped something much worse. The officers arrived quickly, their footsteps heavy as they moved through the diner, their flashlights slicing through the dim light. I gave them my statement, repeating everything I'd told the 911 operator, though my mind was still racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the van, the way it had sat there for hours, just waiting, as if it were stalking me. I told them about the figure in the driver's seat, how he hadn't moved the entire time. I tried to remember every detail I could, his silhouette, the way he seemed to watch the diner like he was waiting for something, or maybe someone. They took down my information, asked me to describe everything in detail, and then said they would investigate. I didn't feel much comfort in their reassurances. What was there to investigate? The van was gone, and the man was nowhere to be found. I'd barely seen his face, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that the whole thing wasn't over. The officers told me to stay alert and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. They mentioned something about keeping an eye on the area, but deep down, I knew that they couldn't protect me from the fear that had taken root in my chest. Even as they left, telling me to be safe, I still felt as though I wasn't truly alone. As soon as their lights disappeared down the road, a horrible realization hit me. The van was still out there. Though the officers had assured me they would keep a lookout, the sense of unease remained, gnawing at the back of my mind. My thoughts spiraled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I stood there in the diner for what seemed like hours, my eyes darting between the empty parking lot and the door, wondering if the man would return. Would he come back for me? I couldn't escape the thought that he had been waiting for the perfect moment, when I was alone and vulnerable. It only took a few minutes for the officers to catch up with the vehicle. They had found the van just a few blocks away, parked on a quiet street. The officers pulled the vehicle over quickly, and what they found inside sent a chill through me. Rope, duct tape, gloves, a hunting knife. My stomach lurched when I heard the details. The driver was a middle-aged man, his face hardened, his expression unreadable when they arrested him. He had a long history of assault charges, and it was clear now that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. I didn't ask for the details. I didn't need to know. As the officers left, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The van had been waiting for hours, parked at the far end of the parking lot. It had been waiting for me, watching, stalking, until the moment was right. I had been the prey in someone's twisted game, and I had barely escaped with my life. The police were quick to reassure me that the man had been taken into custody, that I was safe now, but the fear didn't dissipate. I couldn't stop thinking about the hours I had spent alone in that diner, with the figure in the van never moving, just watching, waiting. Mel's 24-hour diner didn't feel the same after that night. Every shadow in the parking lot felt like it was hiding something. Every passing car seemed to carry a threat. Even though the van was gone, the fear still lingered. I knew that I would never be the same, that the quiet nights I had once found comfort in now felt suffocating, oppressive. And though I tried to convince myself that I was safe, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there would always be another predator waiting in the dark. I've been working the night shift at this small, off the beaten path motel in California for almost 6 months now. It's one of those places where most of the guests are passing through on long drives, or maybe just stopping to rest for a few hours before continuing on to wherever they're heading. Uh, the motel itself is old, like really old. The paint is chipped and faded, the neon sign flickers when the wind blows too hard, and the floors in the lobby creak underfoot. It's got a kind of nostalgic charm, but it's also a little bit depressing. I sit behind the front desk most of the night. The night shift is quiet, often eerily so. The only sounds are the occasional car whizzing by on the nearby highway or the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. Sometimes I hear the distant howls of coyotes or the rustling of trees in the wind. I've gotten used to it by now. In fact, it's kind of comforting. But that night was different. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I decided I needed a break. My head was heavy, my eyes sore, and the quiet of the office was starting to get to me. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside to get some fresh air. The cold night air hit me immediately, sharp against my skin, but it was refreshing. I locked the door behind me and wandered into the parking lot, looking up at the sky. The stars were bright, but there was a faint haze from the nearby city lights. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees was calming, but something felt off. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for one car parked under a flickering streetlight near the far end of the lot. The lights above buzzed intermittently, and the shadows felt longer, stretching across the pavement like they were alive. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked slowly to the corner of the lot, the cold air stinging my face. I leaned against the rusted metal fence that bordered the motel from the highway, staring into the darkness beyond. My breath came out in small, visible clouds. It was peaceful in a way, but there was something about the silence that made my skin crawl, like the whole world was waiting for something to happen. I took a deep breath and tried to relax. And that's when I saw him. At the far end of the parking lot, by the line where the pavement met the gravel, there was a figure standing completely still. At first, I thought it might be one of the guests, maybe walking back to their room. But something about it didn't feel right. The figure wasn't moving, wasn't even shifting from side to side like most people do when they're standing still. It was almost like he was frozen in place. I squinted, trying to make out the details, but it was hard. The dim light from the street lamp barely illuminated the figure. He was dressed in dark clothes, but that was all I could make out. His posture was stiff, his back straight, and his arms hung loosely by his sides. It was almost as if he was waiting for something, or someone. I felt my stomach tighten, my pulse picking up. Something in my gut told me to go back inside, but I stood there, staring at him. My feet felt glued to the ground, and a cold sweat started to form on the back of my neck. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was just another trucker or traveler, just another person passing through, stopping for the night. But the more I watched him, the more uneasy I became. It was like he was waiting for something or someone, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what it was. I took a small step toward him, thinking maybe I could call out or wave to see if he was lost or needed help. But before I could make another move, the figure shifted. Not a full movement, just one step forward. My heart skipped a beat. The small shift in his position made me freeze. It felt deliberate, like he was aware of me watching him. That was when the feeling hit me, hard and fast, the feeling that I was being watched. My instincts screamed at me to turn and go back inside, but I just stood there, a sinking feeling growing in my stomach. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just waiting for a friend or looking for something in his car. but something was off about him. I could feel it deep in my bones. I made the decision to head back to the office. There was no real reason to stay outside any longer, and I needed to get away from that feeling. I turned slowly, my footsteps quickening as I walked back toward the door, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The figure hadn't moved, at least not that I could tell. I reached the door and pulled it open, stepping inside. I locked it behind me with a click, my hands slightly trembling. I made my way to the front desk and sat down, staring out through the small window that looked out over the parking lot. The streetlight was still flickering, casting long shadows. I waited, but nothing happened. No movement, no noise. Still, I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine. The minutes passed in silence, but it felt like hours. I kept glancing outside, hoping that I was just being paranoid, that the figure had simply been some lost soul passing through. I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to focus on something, anything else. The flicker of the streetlight, the distant hum of cars on the highway, the occasional rustling of the trees. But the quiet was so overwhelming, it made every sound seem amplified. I couldn't help it. I had to know if he was still out there. I grabbed my flashlight from the drawer and, after a long hesitation, stepped back outside. The cold air hit me again, sharper than before. I walked to the corner of the lot, shining the light in front of me, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. My eyes kept darting back to the far end of the lot, hoping to see nothing, but the figure was still there, standing in the same spot, as if he had never moved. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. My mind raced. Was I overreacting? Was he just some guy who had decided to take a breather in the parking lot? Maybe he was waiting for someone, a ride, a call. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it all felt. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. My boots scraped against the asphalt, and I stopped a few feet away, shining the flashlight in his direction. But he didn't move, didn't react. I tried to steady my breath, trying to calm myself down, but it wasn't working. The silence felt thick and oppressive. And then, just as I was about to turn back, he turned his head sharply. It was so sudden, I froze. His eyes locked with mine. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, but I could feel his gaze like it was burning into me. My heart stopped for a beat, and then it started racing, pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I didn't know what to do. My body was frozen, like my feet had turned to stone. I wanted to run back inside, lock the door, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. I felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator. And then he moved. He started walking toward me. I snapped out of my trance, my heart hammering in my chest. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran toward the office, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. My boots pounded the pavement, and my flashlight dropped from my hand, spinning on the ground behind me. I reached the door just as I heard him moving, his footsteps quickening. I got the door open and slammed it shut behind me, locking it as fast as I could. My heart was in my throat, and my head was spinning. I staggered backward, trying to catch my breath. I looked out the window, barely able to make out his form in the darkness. He was standing just outside, now pressing his face against the glass. His eyes were wide, frantic, and locked onto mine. I could see the panic in his face, but there was something else, something more primal, more desperate. I backed away from the door, heart racing, hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone as I dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, and I barely managed to explain the situation between frantic breaths. "Someone's trying to break in," I gasped. "I need help. Now." The man outside didn't stop. His hands were still pressed against the glass, his face contorted in desperation. I could see his breath fogging up the window as he pounded on the door with his fists. Each thud made the entire building shake, and I thought for a second that the glass might shatter under the pressure. And then something changed. He stopped banging on the door and stepped back. I didn't know what was going through his mind, but for a moment, he just stood there, staring at the door with wide, frantic eyes. It was like he was trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't breathe, my chest tightening as I waited, hoping the police would arrive soon. The silence was suffocating, and my mind raced. Was he planning to try another way in? Would he keep pushing until he succeeded? The sirens finally broke the silence. A distant wail grew louder, and the man's head snapped toward the sound. His body tensed, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. Then, without a word, he turned and fled. His footsteps echoed as he sprinted across the lot and disappeared into the shadows, his hurried movements like a shadow in the night. I stood frozen, staring at the spot where he had been, my heart still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The police arrived a few minutes later, their sirens blaring as they pulled into the parking lot. I quickly ran to the door, opened it slightly, and waved them in. They didn't waste any time. They checked the perimeter of the building and searched the area, but the man was long gone. One of the officers came back to the office and asked if I had seen anything else, but all I could do was shake my head. I was still processing everything, how close I had come to something terrible. They later told me that they had found out the man had been loitering around the motel for a while, looking for an opportunity to break in. He'd been acting strangely, knocking on doors and trying to get inside rooms. Apparently, he had been doing this for hours, casing the place, trying to find an opening. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, though. The image of his wide, desperate eyes, his hands slamming against the door, and his sudden sprint into the night stuck with me. I still work the night shift at the same motel. Every time I step outside and glance at the parking lot, I can't help but wonder, was he really gone? Or is he still out there, waiting, watching from the shadows, looking for another chance?